That janitor couldn't tame a carousel horse, let alone this wild beast. With those mocking words and a $5,000 bet, wealthy rancher Alexander Whitfield unknowingly changed everything at Silvercrest Equestrian Center. The untamable Midnight Black Mustang had already injured 3 professional trainers, but when 65-year-old Ray Dawson quietly accepted the challenge, jaws dropped. Nobody in Heartland understood why the stooped man who'd silently swept their stables for 7 years would risk his safety for such an impossible task. As Ray began working with the violent stallion in the dead of night, whispers spread through town about the strange methods no one had seen before, about the way the horse responded when no one else was watching, about the mysterious past Ray never discussed. Something extraordinary was happening between the overlooked janitor and the unbreakable Mustang, a connection that would eventually expose shocking secrets, heal old wounds, and prove that sometimes the most powerful bonds form between souls, that society has equally dismissed as broken beyond repair. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. A golden sunrise painted long shadows across the pristine grounds of Silvercrest Equestrian Center. The facility stood like a crown jewel on the outskirts of Heartland, its whitewashed fences and immaculate barns a testament to the wealth that had built it. Inside the main stable, Ray Dawson moved methodically between stalls, his weathered hands gripping a push broom with practiced efficiency. At 65, his spine curved slightly from decades of labor, but his movements remained purposeful, deliberate. The embroidered name tag on his faded coveralls read simply, Ray, though few people at Silvercrest ever bothered to address him by name. He was background noise, part of the scenery, the man who cleaned up after the horses and the people who could afford them. The distant sound of hoofbeats announced the morning riders. Ray shifted to the side of the aisle as a bay gelding trotted past, its rider a teenage girl perched confidently in an expensive saddle. "Morning, Mr. Dawson," called Ellie Whitfield, the only person who consistently acknowledged his existence. "Miss Ellie?" Ray nodded, his voice a gravelly rumble from disuse. 16 years old with her grandfather's determined chin and eyes that missed nothing, Ellie reined her horse to a stop. "Have you seen the new Mustang? The one they brought in? Him from Thunder Basin?" Ray shook his head, though he'd heard the commotion the day before. Angry snorts, frightened whinnies, and colorful curses from the handlers. "He's magnificent," Ellie continued, excitement brightening her features, "completely black, except for a tiny white star on his forehead. Grandfather says he's untrainable, but I think he's just scared." Before Ray could respond, Sarah Cooper's voice called from the entrance. "Ellie, your lesson started 5 minutes ago." "Coming," she clicked her tongue, urging her horse forward. "You should see him, Mr. Dawson," she called over her shoulder. Ray returned to his sweeping, but Ellie's words lingered. A wild Mustang at Silvercrest was unusual. The facility specialized in European warm bloods and thoroughbreds, horses with pedigrees longer than the client list. Wild horses didn't fit the Silvercrest image. At the far end of the stable, raised voices drew Ray's attention. He recognized Alexander Whitfield's authoritative tone immediately. The owner of Silvercrest stood ramrod straight despite his 70 years, silver hair perfectly coiffed, boots polished to a mirror shine. Beside him, Marcus Reeves, the head trainer, gestured emphatically toward the isolation paddock visible through the open doors. "3 of my best handlers, Mr. Whitfield. 3, and Jenkins might need stitches." "I'm well aware of the situation." "Marcus?" Alexander replied with the clipped patience of a man unused to explaining himself. "The Bureau of Land Management specifically requested our help with this animal. With all due respect, sir, we train show horses, not wild Mustangs." "This isn't what we do." Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. This particular Mustang has exceptional conformation. The BLM believes with proper training, he could serve as a prime example of the breed's potential. It would be excellent publicity. Marcus shook his head. No one's getting near that animal. He's dangerous. Nonsense. Every horse can be broken. Not this one. I've seen that look before. Some horses just can't accept captivity. Alexander turned, noticing Ray for the first time. The janitor had paused his sweeping, standing motionless, as if hoping to remain invisible. What do you think? Dawson, you've been around horses. Ray startled at being addressed directly by the owner. Sir, the Mustang. You've been listening, haven't you? What's your assessment? Ray hesitated, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Haven't seen him. Myself, sir. Alexander made a dismissive sound. Well, go take a look. I'm curious what our stable hand thinks of this supposedly untamable beast. Ray carefully propped his broom against the wall and moved toward the paddock doors. Outside, the isolation area was constructed of reinforced fencing, designed for difficult horses. In the center stood the Mustang. Ray's breath caught. The horse was indeed magnificent, coat black as midnight, muscles rippling beneath the glossy surface, head high and proud. He paced the perimeter restlessly, nostrils flared, eyes wild with fear disguised as aggression. When he moved, it was with fluid grace despite the tension evident in every line of his body. Well, Alexander prompted from behind. Ray considered, his words carefully. He's scared, Marcus snorted. He's vicious, nearly took Jenkins' arm off. Ray kept his eyes on the Mustang. Fear makes them dangerous. Exactly, Marcus agreed, which is why we need to establish dominance immediately. Ray's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the fence rail. Not dominance. Trust, Alexander laughed. Listen to the janitor, giving training advice to my head trainer. What next? Several stable hands had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Gerald Watson, one of Silvercrest's wealthiest clients, approached with his wife Pamela. Having trouble with the new acquisition, Alex? Gerald asked, eyeing the Mustang with the appraising look of a man who evaluated everything in terms of monetary value. Nothing we can't handle, Alexander assured him. Just a particularly spirited specimen. Gerald chuckled. Looks like a lost cause to me. Wild horses rarely adapt to domestic life, especially the older stallions. Marcus seized the opportunity. That's what I've been saying, Mr. Whitfield. This horse isn't suitable for our program. Alexander's face hardened, his pride clearly stung by the suggestion of a failure. Nonsense. Any horse can be trained with the right approach. It's simply a matter of breaking their spirit. Ray's soft voice surprised them all. That would be a shame. The group turned to him, startled by his interjection. What did you say, Dawson? Alexander demanded. Ray kept his eyes on the Mustang, who had stopped pacing to stare back at him. Breaking his spirit would be a shame, sir. He's got heart. Alexander laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Heart doesn't win dressage competitions. Discipline does. Gerald eyed Ray with amusement. Perhaps your janitor should try his hand at training, Alex. He seems to have opinions on the matter. Now that would be a sight, Pamela Watson added with a titter. For a moment, Alexander seemed to consider this absurd notion, his eyes calculating. Then a smile spread across his face, not kind, but intrigued. Why not? He said finally. Dawson, you think this horse deserves special treatment? Perhaps you'd like to show us how it's done. Ray shifted uncomfortably under the sudden scrutiny. That's not my place, sir. I'll make it worth your while, Alexander continued, warming to the idea. In fact, let's make it interesting. He pulled a checkbook from his jacket pocket. $5,000 says you can't gentle that Mustang within 1 month. No breaking his spirit, as you put it. Just make him rideable. A murmur ran through the gathered staff. $5,000 was more than Ray made in 3 months. Marcus stepped forward. Mr. Whitfield, this isn't appropriate. Dawson has no training experience. Do you accept, Dawson? Alexander interrupted. Ignoring his head trainer's objection, Ray looked from Alexander to the Mustang, who stood now at the far end of the paddock, watching the humans with wary intelligence. No shortcuts, Ray said finally. I do it my way. Alexander's eyebrows rose at the unexpected stipulation. Your way? And what exactly is your way, Janitor? Patience, Ray answered simply. The small crowd laughed, but Alexander seemed more intrigued than amused. Very well, no shortcuts. You have 1 month. If you succeed, $5,000 is yours. If you fail... He paused for effect. You find employment elsewhere. Sarah Cooper pushed forward through the onlookers. Mr. Whitfield, that's not fair. It's fair if Dawson agrees, Alexander countered. Well, Janitor, do we have a deal? Ray's weathered face revealed nothing of his thoughts. He looked once more at the Mustang, their eyes meeting across the paddock. Something passed between them, an understanding perhaps, or a recognition. We have a deal, Ray said quietly. Alexander clapped his hands together. Excellent. This should prove entertaining if nothing else. As the crowd dispersed, muttering about the bizarre wager, Sarah approached Ray. Are you crazy? She whispered. That horse put Jenkins in the hospital. Ray continued to watch the Mustang. He's just lost, Sarah. Doesn't understand why he's here or what we want from him. And you do? She asked, studying his profile. He didn't answer directly. I'll need access to the paddock, morning and evening, and no one interferes. Sarah sighed. I'll make sure you get whatever you need. But Ray, be careful. There's something wild in that one that might never be tamed. A ghost of a smile touched Ray's lips. We're all wild until we choose not to be. Later that evening, after the stables had emptied of riders and trainers, Ray returned to the isolation paddock. The Mustang stood in the gathering dusk, his black coat almost invisible in the shadows, only his eyes reflecting the stable lights. Ray settled onto an overturned bucket just outside the fence, produced a worn paperback from his pocket, and began to read aloud. His voice was soft, the words insignificant, a Louis L'Amour western he'd read a dozen times before. The Mustang's ears flicked toward the sound, suspicious yet curious. For an hour, Ray simply read, never looking directly at the horse, never, making sudden movements. When he finally closed the book, the Mustang had moved slightly closer, still wary but listening. That's enough for tonight, Ray murmured, rising stiffly. See you tomorrow, friend. As Ray made his way back to his small apartment above the maintenance shed, he didn't notice Ellie Whitfield watching from the shadows of the tack room, her young face alight with curiosity. Dawn found Ray at the paddock again, this time with a thermos of coffee and the same book. The Mustang stood at the opposite end, but his posture seemed less defensive than the day before. Ray settled onto his bucket and began to read. Halfway through the first chapter, Marcus Reeves approached, his face tight with displeasure. This is your brilliant training method. Reading bedtime stories. Ray marked his page before answering. Good morning, Mr. Reeves. What are you playing at, Dawson? You know you can't win this bet. Not trying to win anything, just helping the horse. Marcus laughed harshly. The horse? That's a 1,500-pound wild animal that nearly killed my assistant. It needs proper training, not story time. Ray glanced toward the Mustang, who had retreated to the farthest corner at Marcus's loud voice. He has a name yet? What? The Mustang? Does he have a name? Marcus made a dismissive gesture. BLM designation is Thioshu 72. We've been calling him the Black Devil. Ray shook his head slightly. Doesn't suit him. For God's sake, Dawson, it's a horse, not a person. Stop this nonsense before you get hurt. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but Whitfield isn't known for his patience. When you fail, and you will fail, he'll follow through on his threat. Appreciate the concern, Ray replied mildly. Marcus straightened, frustration evident in every line of his body. Your funeral, he muttered, stalking away. When he was gone, Ray returned to his reading. The Mustang, sensing the change in atmosphere, cautiously moved forward again. Don't mind him, Ray said conversationally to the horse. He's just worried about his position. Can't blame a man for protecting what he's worked for. He studied the Mustang thoughtfully. Midnight, he decided. That's who you are. Not a number, not a devil. Just midnight. The horse's ears pricked forward at the sound of the name. Throughout the day, Ray balanced his regular duties with brief visits to the paddock. He never tried to enter, never brought a rope or halter. He simply existed in midnight space, allowing the Mustang to grow accustomed to his presence. By evening, whispers had spread through Silvercrest. Stable hands and riders alike found excuses to pass by the isolation paddock, curious about the janitor's unusual approach. Most scoffed at the sight of Ray reading to a wild horse. A few, however, noticed something peculiar. The Mustang seemed to be listening. As dusk settled over the facility, Ray made his final visit of the day. This time, rather than reading, he brought a guitar, an old instrument with worn frets, and a mellow tone. He settled onto his bucket and began to play quietly, simple melodies that floated on the evening air. Midnight approached the fence cautiously, drawn by the unusual sounds. 10 feet away he stopped, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. Music soothes more than human souls, Ray murmured between songs. My brother Chuck taught me that. He was the real musician in the family. The Mustang's ears flicked back and, fourth-tracking Ray's gentle voice. Tomorrow I'll bring you an apple, Ray continued conversationally. Not as a bribe, just as an introduction. You probably haven't tasted apples where you come from. As darkness fell completely, Ray packed up his guitar. Good night, Midnight, he said softly. Tomorrow's another day. As he turned to leave, he found Alexander Whitfield watching from the shadows, his expression unreadable. Interesting approach, Dawson, the owner said, stepping into the light. Do you actually believe reading and music will tame a wild Mustang? Ray tucked his guitar under his arm. Not trying to tame him, sir, just introducing myself. Alexander studied him thoughtfully. You know, I can't decide if you're a fool or if you're hiding something. No one takes on a challenge like this without some expertise. Just a janitor, sir, Ray replied evenly. Are you? Alexander's eyes narrowed. 29 days left, Dawson. I hope for your sake you know what you're doing. As Alexander walked away, Ray turned back toward the paddock. In the darkness, Midnight's eyes gleamed like distant stars. We'll show him, Ray whispered. Won't we, friend? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Day 3 of Ray's challenge dawned overcast, a light drizzle dampening the Silvercrest grounds. He arrived earlier than usual, a small bag tucked under his raincoat. The facility was quiet, most riders unwilling to brave the weather for morning exercises. Midnight stood in the center of the paddock, rain beading on his sleek coat. He watched Ray approach without retreating. A small victory. Ray sat down, his bag, and pulled out 2 apples, one for himself and one for the Mustang. He bit into his with a crisp crunch, the sound causing Midnight's ears to swivel forward with interest. Best kind for horses, Ray commented, setting the second apple on the fence rail. Sweet enough to be tempting, but not so sweet it'll cause. And problems. He returned to his bucket seat, content to wait. For 20 minutes neither moved, Ray chewing his apple methodically, Midnight eyeing the offering with suspicion. Finally, the Mustang approached with cautious steps, nostrils flaring to capture the fruit's scent. In a fluid motion, he snatched the apple from the rail and retreated, crunching it between powerful jaws. Ray smiled, the expression transforming. His weathered face. "You've got manners after all," he murmured. "That's the first time I've seen you smile," came a voice from behind. Ray turned to find Ellie sheltering under the stable overhang, a rain jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. "Miss Ellie," he acknowledged. "No riding today?" "Too wet," she confirmed, approaching cautiously. "Mom thinks I'm doing algebra homework." She nodded toward Midnight. "He took food from you, that's progress." "Small steps," Ray agreed. "Mind if I watch?" she asked, perching on a hay bale several feet away. Ray considered her question. The girl's presence might disturb Midnight, yet there was something in her earnest interest that gave him pause. "You'll need to be still," he said finally. "No sudden movements." Ellie nodded solemnly, settling into a more comfortable position. For the next hour she observed in silence as Ray continued his quiet communion with the Mustang, not demanding attention, simply offering his presence as something non-threatening in Midnight's new world. "Why did you accept Grandfather's bet?" she asked eventually, her voice hushed. Ray didn't answer immediately. "Horse deserves a chance," he said finally. "But you could lose your job." "Been looking for a chance to retire anyway," he replied with a slight shrug. Ellie studied him with the direct gaze characteristic of teenagers who hadn't yet learned to mask their scrutiny. "You're different with him, more present, like you come alive." Ray's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Just doing what needs doing." "Mr. Reeves says wild Mustangs can't be properly trained, that they'll always be unpredictable. Mr. Reeves has his methods, I have mine." "And what are your methods exactly?" she pressed. Ray gave her a sidelong glance. "Patience, listening, respect. You make it sound so simple." "It is simple, just not easy." Ray stood, his knees creaking slightly. "Time for my regular rounds." Mustang or not, floors still need sweeping. Ellie remained seated, watching Midnight. "Does he have a name yet?" "Midnight," Ray answered, gathering his things. She smiled. "It suits him." As Ray moved toward the main stables, Ellie called after him, "I could help, you know. I'm good with horses." He paused, considering. "Not this time, Miss Ellie. Midnight needs consistency now. Too many people might confuse him." She nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "I understand." Throughout the day, Ray balanced his janitorial duties with brief visits to the Mustang. Word of his unusual training methods had spread, drawing skeptical comments from trainers and stable hands alike. "Reading to a horse," Trevor Wilson scoffed during lunch break. "Next he'll be teaching it to read." 5,000 says he can't do it, another handler added. "Whitfield's money is safe." Sarah Cooper silenced them with a sharp look. "That's enough. Let the man work his way." By late afternoon, the rain had stopped and riders returned to the facilities. Ray was cleaning tack when Dr. James Miller, the center's veterinarian, approached. "Here you've taken on our wild friend," Dr. Miller said, leaning against the doorframe. Ray nodded, continuing his work. "I'd like to give him a proper examination, make sure he didn't sustain any injuries during transport." Ray looked up. "He won't allow it yet. I was hoping you might help." The veterinarian shifted his weight. "Marcus wanted to tranquilize him, but I'd prefer not to. Traumatize him further." Ray considered this. "Give me 3 more days, then we'll try." Dr. Miller studied him curiously. "You seem awfully confident for someone with no training experience." Ray's hands continued their methodical work, conditioning leather with practiced movements. "Horse will tell you when he's ready if you listen." "And you know how to listen?" A non-committal shrug was the only response. Dr. Miller straightened. 3 days then. I hope you're right." That evening, as twilight descended, Ray entered the isolation paddock for the first time, carrying only a small lantern. Midnight retreated to the far corner, ears pinned back in warning. "Just me," Ray said softly. "Same as always." He placed the lantern on the ground, and settled cross-legged beside it, pulling out his worn paperback. For 30 minutes he read aloud, his voice a steady rhythm in the gathering darkness. Gradually, Midnight's posture relaxed, curiosity overcoming caution. The Mustang circled the paddock, drawing slightly closer to Ray with each pass. By the time Ray closed his book, Midnight stood just 15 feet away, studying the human intruder with wary intelligence. "Good night, friend," Ray said, rising slowly. He left the lantern burning as he exited, a small beacon of light in the darkness. Unknown to Ray, Alexander watched from his office window overlooking the paddock, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, and a thoughtful expression on his face. The next morning, Ray discovered a crowd gathered at the isolation paddock. Marcus stood at the center, clipboard in hand, issuing instructions to 2 handlers who carried ropes and a training halter. "What's going on?" Ray asked, approaching the group. Marcus turned, his expression a mixture of smugness and professional detachment. "Mr. Whitfield has authorized accelerated training methods. We're going to rope him, then introduce basic halter training." Ray stiffened. "We had an agreement, no shortcuts. Mr. Whitfield's facility, Mr. Whitfield's horse, Mr. Whitfield's rules," Marcus replied. "He's concerned about your lack of progress." Before Ray could respond, Alexander himself appeared, walking briskly from the main building. "Ah, Dawson. Good. You can observe how professionals handle difficult horses." Ray turned to face the owner, his usual deference absent. "Sir, we agreed I'd do this my way." 3 days, and you've done nothing but read to it," Alexander responded dismissively. "At this rate, we'll be lucky if you get within 10 feet of the animal by month's end." "Trust takes time," Ray insisted, an unusual edge entering his voice. "Force him now and you'll destroy any progress." "Progress?" Marcus interjected with a laugh. "What progress? The horse is exactly as wild as the day it arrived." Ray ignored him, focusing on Alexander. "1 week," he said firmly. "Give me one. Week my way. If you don't see measurable progress, then do what you want." Alexander's eyebrows rose at the janitor's unexpected backbone. "Measurable how?" "I'll be touching that horse," Ray said with quiet confidence, handling him without restraints. A murmur ran through the gathered staff. Even Marcus looked surprised by the bold claim. Alexander studied Ray for a long moment, then nodded once. 1 week, but I want daily updates on your technique." As the crowd dispersed, Sarah approached Ray. "That was risky," she murmured. "What if you can't deliver?" Ray watched Midnight, who had observed the entire confrontation from the center of the paddock. "He'll come around." Sarah followed his gaze. "You seem awfully sure for a man whose job depends on a wild horse." "Some things you just know, Sarah." He turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Could use your help, though." "My help? With what?" "Keeping Marcus and his methods away until next week." She sighed. "I'll do what I can, but Whitfield calls the shots around here." Ray nodded his thanks before moving toward the paddock, already reaching for his book. For the next 3 days, Ray maintained his routine, reading in the morning, music in the evening, with brief visits and one-sided conversations throughout the day. To casual observers, nothing seemed to change, yet subtle shifts were occurring. Midnight no longer retreated when Ray entered the paddock. The distance between them gradually decreased. Most tellingly, the Mustang's eyes had lost some of their wild fear. On the 4th day, Ray arrived with a brush instead of a book. He sat in the center of the paddock and began grooming his own arms, his movements deliberate, the bristles making a distinctive sound against the fabric of his coveralls. Midnight watched, ears forward with curiosity. After several minutes, Ray placed the brush on the ground between them and continued talking in the same quiet voice he always used, now about the coming spring and the wildflowers that would soon blanket the hills around Heartland. Slowly, with infinite patience, Midnight approached the brush, nostrils flaring as he investigated this new object. When he nudged it with his muzzle, Ray made no move to retrieve it, allowing the horse to satisfy, his curiosity unhindered. "Smart fellow," Ray murmured, "figuring things out your way." By day's end, Midnight had allowed Ray within arm's reach, not yet accepting touch, but tolerating proximity in a way that would have seemed impossible a week earlier. On the 6th morning, Alexander and Marcus arrived at the paddock to find Ray already inside, sitting cross-legged with his back against the fence. Midnight grazed nearby, periodically raising his head to check Ray's position. "Impressive," Alexander acknowledged grudgingly. "But proximity isn't handling. You said you'd be touching that horse by week's end." "Day's not over yet," Ray replied, not rising from his position. Marcus snorted. "There's a difference between a horse tolerating your presence and accepting handling. Dawson, don't pretend they're the same." Ray didn't respond to the taunt, his attention focused on Midnight, who had tensed at the newcomers' voices. Only when the Mustang relaxed again did Ray speak. "Might want to step back from the fence," he suggested quietly. "Your energy's making him nervous." Marcus rolled his eyes, but Alexander, intrigued despite himself, took a step back, pulling his head trainer with him. Through the day, staff members found excuses to pass by the isolation paddock. Even some of Silvercrest's wealthy clients lingered, watching the unusual scene, a janitor sitting motionless while a wild Mustang circled him with decreasing wariness. Ellie arrived after school, taking a position beside Sarah at the fence. "Is he just going to sit there all day?" she whispered. Sarah shrugged. "Apparently, he hasn't moved since dawn except to drink water." "And grandfather is allowing this?" "Your grandfather's fascinated, though he'd never admit it." As afternoon faded into evening, the spectators dwindled until only a handful remained. Ray still sat in the center of the paddock, seemingly impervious to discomfort. Midnight had drawn progressively closer throughout the day, now grazing just a few feet away. Just as the stable hands were turning on the evening lights, Midnight raised his head, ears pricked forward, and took a deliberate step toward Ray. Then another. The remaining observers fell silent. With exquisite slowness, the Mustang extended his muzzle toward Ray's outstretched hand. For a breathless moment, horse and man remained frozen, separated by inches of charged air. Then contact, Midnight's velvet nostrils brushing against Ray's weathered palm. The touch lasted only seconds before the Mustang backed away, but its significance wasn't lost on anyone watching. A wild horse, willingly making contact with a human, less than a week after arriving, terrified and aggressive. A small smile touched Ray's lips as he slowly rose to his feet, bones stiff from hours of sitting. He made no attempt to follow or reach for Midnight, simply nodding respectfully to the horse before turning toward the gate. Alexander and Marcus waited there, the former's expression thoughtful, the latter's disbelieving. "Well, Dawson," Alexander said as Ray exited the paddock. "It appears you've earned another week." Ray nodded, too tired for conversation. As he moved to walk past, Alexander placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "How did you know?" the owner asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "How did you know he would come to you today?" Ray met his gaze directly. "Wasn't about him coming. To me, was about me being worthy of his trust. And what made you worthy? Patience, consistency." Ray paused. "Respect." Alexander released his arm. "Perhaps there's more to you than meets the eye, Janitor." "Just a man doing a job, sir," Ray replied, the familiar mask of deference sliding back into place as he walked away. Behind him, Midnight stood watching from the center of the paddock, no longer retreating, no longer afraid. A silent sentinel. In the gathering dusk, that night, Ray sat at his small kitchen table in the apartment above the maintenance shed, rubbing liniment into his aching joints. The day's stillness had taken a toll on his aging body, though he'd never have admitted it to the observers. A knock at his door startled him. Few people ever visited his modest quarters. Sarah Cooper stood outside, a covered dish in her hands. "Thought you might be hungry," she said by way of greeting. "And curious about the betting pool." Ray raised an eyebrow as he stepped aside to let her enter. "Betting pool?" "Half the staff has money on whether you'll succeed." She set the dish on his table, homemade stew, still warm. "Odds have shifted in your favor after today." "And where do you stand?" he asked, fetching 2 bowls from his cupboard. Sarah accepted. "The offered seat. I don't bet on certainties." He glanced at her sharply. "Meaning?" "Meaning I've watched you for 7 years, Ray. You've never struck me as an ordinary janitor." She served the stew while he sliced bread. "The way you move around horses, the way you read their behavior, those aren't skills you pick up sweeping stables." Ray's expression revealed nothing as he sat across from her. "People can learn a lot in 70 years. 65, she corrected, "unless your employment file is wrong." He acknowledged the correction with a slight nod, then changed the subject. "Tell me about the Mustang. Where'd he come from?" Sarah allowed the deflection. "Bureau of Land Management roundup at Thunder Basin. Most of the herd was processed for adoption, but this one caught someone's eye. They contacted Alexander, knowing his connections in the equestrian world." "Why Silvercrest? This isn't a rescue facility." "That's the curious part." Sarah blew on a spoonful of stew. "Apparently, there's something special about this particular Mustang. Something in his bloodline or confirmation that makes him valuable as a breeding prospect." Ray considered this information. Unusual to consider a wild Mustang for breeding stock. That's what Marcus said, but the BLM officer insisted this one was different, possibly descended from cavalry stock that escaped decades ago. So Alexander agreed to take him. For the prestige, yes. If he could produce the first successfully domesticated wild Mustang breeding stallion, it would be quite the feather in Silvercrest's cap. Sarah studied him over her bowl. But then, the horse proved more difficult than anticipated. And now, here we are, the fate of a remarkable animal in the hands of the maintenance man. "I've been called worse," Ray remarked with the ghost of a smile. "I'm on your side, you know," she said after a moment. "Whatever your history, whatever you're hiding, I've seen enough to know you're our best hope for that horse." Ray met her, and gaze, seemingly on the verge of saying more, but ultimately offered only a simple "thank you." As Sarah prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Marcus is threatened by you. He'll try to undermine your progress." "Expected as much." "Be careful, Ray. There's more at stake here than a bet." After she left, Ray stood at his small window, looking out at the isolation paddock just visible in the moonlight. Midnight's dark form moved against the pale fencing, restless even in the quiet night. "We're more alike than they know," he murmured, to the distant shape. "Both carrying histories they'd never understand." The second week of Ray's challenge brought warmer weather and increasing curiosity from Silvercrest's staff and clients. His unorthodox methods had proven more effective than anyone anticipated, forcing even the most skeptical observers to reassess their assumptions. Dr. Miller arrived early Monday morning, medical kit in hand. "Think he'll let me near him today?" Ray, who had been refreshing Midnight's water, straightened with a slight wince. "We'll see. No sudden movements, no syringes visible." The veterinarian nodded, following Ray into the paddock with cautious steps. Midnight immediately moved to the far side, ears flicking nervously. "Talk to him," Ray instructed, stepping slightly away to give the horse space. "Let him hear your voice." Dr. Miller cleared his throat. "Hey there, big fellow. Just want to make sure you're healthy." For 10 minutes, the veterinarian continued this one-sided conversation, while Midnight gradually relaxed his defensive posture. Ray remained still, a reassuring presence between horse and stranger. Approach from the shoulder, Ray advised when midnight had settled. "Move slow. Let him smell you first." Dr. Miller followed these instructions with professional precision. To his amazement, Midnight allowed a brief examination, heart rate, respiration, even a cursory check of his teeth. "That's enough for today," Ray said when he noticed the Mustang's first signs of restlessness. As they exited the paddock, Dr. Miller shook his head in wonder. "Remarkable. I've never seen a wild horse except handling so quickly." "He's intelligent," Ray replied. "Figuring out we're not a threat." "It's more than that," the veterinarian insisted. "He trusts you specifically." He studied Ray curiously. "Where did you learn this approach? It's certainly not the conventional method." Ray's weathered face revealed nothing. "Just common sense. Any creature responds better to kindness than force." Before Dr. Miller could press further, Marcus appeared, his expression darkening at the sight of the two men leaving the paddock together. "Made yourself an ally, Dawson?" he asked, voice sharp with accusation. "Just doing my job," Dr. Miller answered for them both. "The Mustang appears healthy, though I'd like a more thorough examination eventually." Marcus snorted. "Good luck with that. Wild horses don't submit to veterinary care without sedation." "This one did," Dr. Miller countered mildly. "Thanks to Ray's assistance." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as Ray excused himself to resume his regular duties. The head trainer waited until Ray was out of earshot before turning to the veterinarian. "Don't be fooled, James. That janitor is hiding something." Dr. Miller raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "I don't know yet, but nobody develops that kind of rapport with horses by sweeping stables. I've asked around town. Nobody knows anything about him before he showed up here 7 years ago. Don't you find that strange?" "Perhaps," the veterinarian conceded, "but his methods are working. The Mustang is responding. Isn't that what matters?" Marcus's expression hardened. "What matters is maintaining standards at Silvercrest. We don't need janitors playing horse whisperer and undermining professional trainers." Throughout the day, Ray balanced his regular work with brief sessions in the paddock. By afternoon, Midnight was accepting gentle touches along his neck and shoulder, still tense, still ready to flee, but making remarkable progress for a horse just 10 days removed from the wild. Ellie arrived after school, watching through the fence as Ray demonstrated how to approach the Mustang without triggering his flight response. "Grandfather's actually impressed," she said when Ray exited the paddock, though he'd never admit it publicly. "Just doing what the horse needs," Ray replied, wiping dust from his hands. "Could you teach me?" she asked suddenly. "Not just with Midnight, with horses in general. I've had professional instructors since I was 6, but none of them connect with horses the way you do." Ray studied her earnest expression. "What would your grandfather say about that?" "He doesn't need to." "No." Seeing Ray's disapproving look, she quickly added, "At first, I mean. Once he sees the results, he won't mind." "Dishonesty's no foundation for learning, Miss Ellie." She sighed. "You sound like a teacher." Something flickered in Ray's eyes. So briefly, Ellie might have imagined it. Just experience talking. "Please, I could help with Midnight, be your assistant." Despite himself, Ray felt his resolve wavering. The girl had genuine passion and a natural way with horses that reminded him of... He stopped the thought abruptly. "We'll see," he said finally. "For now you can observe." From outside the paddock, Ellie beamed. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson. You won't regret it." As she hurried away, Ray wondered if he already did. That evening, Alexander summoned Ray to his office, an oak-paneled room filled with equestrian trophies and photographs of championship horses. Ray stood uncomfortably in the doorway, unwilling to track paddock dust onto the expensive carpet. "Come in, Dawson," Alexander said, not looking up from his paperwork. "I understand Dr. Miller was able to examine the Mustang today." "Basic examination." "Yes, sir." Alexander signed a document before finally raising his eyes. "Sit down." Ray hesitated, then perched on the edge of an armchair, back straight, hands resting on his knees. "I've been watching your progress," Alexander continued. "Unorthodox methods, but effective. The question is, why? Sir, why is a man with your obvious expertise working as a janitor at my facility? Why hide your knowledge of horse training for 7 years, only to reveal it now?" Ray remained silent, his expression carefully neutral. Alexander leaned forward. "I made some calls today. Nobody in Heartland seems to know anything about your background before you arrived here. Most assumed you were just another drifter looking for quiet work. Never claimed otherwise, sir." "No, you didn't." Alexander studied him thoughtfully. "You know, Marcus believes you're some kind of fraud, that you've picked up a few tricks and gotten lucky with this Mustang." Ray met his gaze steadily, but offered no defense. "I, however," Alexander continued, "recognize expertise when I see it. You've handled horses before. Professionally, I'd wager. The real question is why you'd hide such valuable skills. Just want to do the job I was hired for, Mr. Whitfield?" Alexander laughed without humor. "The job you were hired for pays barely above minimum wage. With your abilities, you could command 10 times that as a trainer." When Ray remained silent, Alexander sighed. "Very well. Keep your secrets. For now. But understand this. If you succeed with that Mustang, I'll want answers. No man wastes talent like yours without good reason. Will that be all, sir?" Alexander waved a dismissive hand. "For tonight. But this conversation isn't over, Dawson." Ray nodded respectfully before retreating, aware that his carefully constructed anonymity was beginning to crumble. The following morning, Ray arrived to find someone had entered the paddock overnight. Midnight stood trembling in the corner, a chain halter fastened too tightly around his head, the lead rope tangled in his legs where he had clearly fought against it. "Easy, easy," Ray murmured, approaching slowly. The Mustang's eyes rolled white with fear, but he didn't bolt, a testament to the trust they'd established. With gentle hands, Ray untangled the rope and removed the halter, examining the roar. Spots where metal had chafed against the horse's sensitive skin. Anger, an emotion he rarely allowed himself, flared in his chest. Outside the paddock, he found Sarah supervising the morning feeding. "Someone put a chain halter on Midnight last night," he said without preamble. Her eyes widened. "What? Who would do that?" "Question answers itself, I reckon." Sarah's expression darkened with understanding. "Marcus, it has to be. But why? Set us back, make the horse unmanageable again. That's..." Sarah struggled to find words. "That's not just unprofessional, it's cruel. We should tell Alexander." Ray shook his head. "No proof. Would be my word against his." "Then what will you do?" He glanced toward the main stable where Marcus was instructing a young rider. "Adapt. Horse comes first." Throughout the day, Ray focused on rebuilding Midnight's confidence. The incident had damaged their progress, making the Mustang skittish and defensive once again. By evening, Ray had managed to touch him briefly, but the easy trust of the previous day had vanished. As darkness fell, Ray sat in his usual spot in the paddock, playing soft melodies on his guitar. Midnight kept his distance, still unsettled. "We'll get through this," Ray promised quietly. "Had worse setbacks, you and me both." A sound at the paddock gate drew his attention. Ellie slipped inside, moving cautiously in the dim light. "Miss Ellie," Ray acknowledged, continuing to play, "shouldn't be in here." "I know who hurt Midnight," she whispered, settling onto the ground a few feet away. "I overheard Marcus talking to Trevor. He said they needed to remind the Mustang of his place before you got too cocky." Ray's fingers stilled on the strings. "You sure about that?" She nodded solemnly. "Should we tell Grandfather? Would you testify to what you heard?" Ellie hesitated, suddenly understanding the position she would be in if she accused the head trainer of sabotage. I don't know. Marcus has worked here forever. Grandfather trusts him. Then we keep it between us for now, Ray decided. But I appreciate you telling me. It's not fair, she protested. What they did to Midnight. Life rarely is, Miss Ellie. He resumed playing, the music filling the space between them. But we play the hand we're dealt. For several minutes, they sat in companionable silence. To Ray's surprise, Midnight gradually moved closer, drawn perhaps by the presence of the girl whose energy differed so markedly from the men who had frightened him. He likes you, Ray observed, as the Mustang extended his muzzle toward Ellie. Her eyes widened. What should I do? Nothing. Let him choose. With exquisite patience, Ellie remained motionless as Midnight investigated her scent. When his velvet nose finally brushed her outstretched palm, a delighted smile illuminated her face. He's softer than I imagined, she whispered. Ray nodded, a peculiar tightness in his chest as he watched the interaction. For a moment, the years fell away, and he was seeing another young girl making her first connection with a special horse. You have a gift, he said quietly. Natural way with them. Like you, she replied, still entranced by the Mustang's willing. Contact, Ray didn't correct her, but the truth lingered unspoken between them. Not like him, like someone lost to him long ago. The following morning, Ray found Alexander waiting at the paddock, a newspaper tucked under his arm, and an inscrutable expression on his face. Something wrong with the Mustang this morning, Alexander said without greeting. Seems to have regressed. Marcus suggests he might be too wild after all. Ray met his gaze steadily. Horse was fine yesterday evening, and yet this morning he won't approach the fence. Shows signs of fear. Curious, wouldn't you say? Very curious, Ray agreed, his tone carefully neutral. Alexander studied him for a moment. Marcus believes we should return to conventional training methods, that your approach was temporarily effective but ultimately inadequate for a truly wild horse. Your decision to make, sir. Indeed it is. Alexander unfolded the newspaper, turning it to reveal an article, which is why I found this particularly interesting. Ray glanced at the headline, Anniversary of Golden Vista Tragedy, marked by continued mystery. His face remained impassive, but something in his posture shifted subtly. Local paper from Wyoming, Alexander continued. 15 years ago, a promising young rider died during training. The horse, a champion jumper named Storm, had to be destroyed. The trainer, renowned for his innovative methods, disappeared shortly after. Fascinating story. What's it got to do with Silvercrest? Ray asked, his voice betraying nothing. Alexander refolded the newspaper. Perhaps nothing. Just caught my attention given our current situation. He fixed Ray with a penetrating stare. The trainer's name was Raymond Dawson. Ray met his gaze unflinchingly. Common enough name. Indeed. Alexander tucked the newspaper under his arm. Well, I've made my decision about the Mustang. You'll continue your methods, with one addition. My granddaughter mentioned she's been observing your work. She'll be formally assisting you from now on. Surprise flickered across Ray's features. Sir, Ellie has a natural affinity for horses, and this presents an educational opportunity. You'll report to me daily on both the Mustang's progress and her involvement. And Marcus, Alexander's expression hardened, will focus on his existing responsibilities. I've made that quite clear to him this morning. As Alexander walked away, Ray remained motionless, aware that his carefully maintained anonymity was unraveling thread by thread. The newspaper article represented more than idle curiosity. It was a warning that Alexander was uncovering his past piece by piece. Inside the paddock, Midnight watched from the far corner, his dark eyes reflecting Ray's own wariness. Both man and horse stood at a crossroads, trust or retreat, revelation or continued hiding. For the first time in 15 years, Ray wondered if running away had truly solved anything at all. Later that day, Ellie arrived at the paddock practically vibrating with excitement. "Grandfather says I'm officially your assistant. Is it true?" Ray, who was mixing a salve for Midnight's halter sores, nodded without looking up. "Seems that way. This is perfect. When do we start? What will I do? Can I help with the halter training?" "Slow down," Ray cautioned. "First rule is patience. Second is observation. Before you do anything with Midnight, you need to learn his language." Ellie's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "I already know horse body language. I've been riding since I was 6. "Domestic horses," Ray corrected. "Horses bred for human interaction. Midnight's different. He thinks like his wild ancestors, evaluating everything as potential predator or prey." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "So I need to show him I'm not a threat." "Good start." Ray handed her a small notebook. "First assignment, sit outside the paddock, record everything he does for 1 hour, every ear twitch, every tail swish, every change in posture." "Just watch?" she asked, disappointed. "Just watch," he confirmed. "Horse'll tell you everything. You need to know if you pay attention." Reluctantly, Ellie settled onto a hay bale, pencil poised over the notebook. Ray left her to her task, using the opportunity to catch up on his neglected maintenance duties. When he returned an hour later, she was still writing furiously. "He has 7 different ear positions," she reported without looking up, "and his tail isn't just for flies, it signals his emotional state. When you approached the fence, his left ear tracked you, while his right kept monitoring the sparrows. In the oak tree, he can split his attention." Ray nodded, pleased by her observations. "What else?" "He tests boundaries, pushed against the weak spot in the northwest corner fence 3 times. And he has preferences, avoids the muddy patch by the water trough, but rolls in the sandy spot near the east side." "Good," Ray acknowledged. "Understanding those patterns is the first step to communication." Ellie looked up at him, excitement replaced by genuine curiosity. "How did you learn all this, Mr. Dawson? Did someone teach you, or did you figure it out yourself?" The question hung between them, deceptively simple, yet touching the core of secrets Ray had kept buried for years. "Bit of both," he answered finally. "Had a natural inclination, then found a mentor who shaped it into something useful. Like you're doing for me," she said, smiling. Ray didn't return the smile, but his expression softened. "Suppose so." As shadows lengthened across the paddock, Ray felt the weight of the past pressing closer. Alexander's newspaper, Ellie's innocent questions, the whispers of recognition from unexpected quarters. His carefully constructed anonymity was dissolving, day by day, and at the center of it all stood Midnight, a creature as displaced and wary as Ray himself had been 15 years ago. The parallel wasn't lost on him as he watched the Mustang navigate his confined space with dignified caution. Some wounds, Ray knew, never fully healed. They merely scabbed over, waiting for the slightest touch to break open again. He could only hope that when his did, he would survive the bleeding. The middle of week 3 marked a turning point. Midnight now accepted Ray's touch freely, even leaning into the contact occasionally, a breakthrough that stunned experienced trainers. The Mustang's transformation from terrified wild animal to cautiously cooperative partner had become the main topic of conversation at Silvercrest. A misty rain fell as Ray worked with a soft rope, gently draping it over Midnight's back and withers. The Mustang flinched initially, but settled when Ray murmured reassurances in his ear. "That's it," he praised softly. "Nothing to fear here." Ellie watched from beneath an umbrella, making notes in what had become a detailed journal of Midnight's progress. Over the past days, her role had evolved from observer to active participant. Her natural empathy complementing Ray's methodical approach. He barely reacted that time, she noted with quiet excitement. Yesterday he sidestepped when the rope touched his flank. Ray nodded, his weathered face revealing a hint of satisfaction. Learning to trust, big step for him. For any of us, came Alexander's voice from the gate. Ray turned, maintaining contact with Midnight as the Mustang tensed at the newcomer's presence. Alexander stood under a large black umbrella, immaculately dressed despite the weather. Impressive. Progress, the owner observed, keeping his distance. Marcus predicted we'd still be trying to approach him at this stage. Horse sets the pace, Ray replied simply. We just follow his lead. Alexander's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. A philosophy at odds with conventional training wisdom. Conventional wisdom tames through submission, Ray said, his hand steady on Midnight's neck. Different approach. Indeed. Alexander gestured to a man standing several paces behind him, middle-aged, expensively dressed, with the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. This is Victor Ramirez. He's interested in our project here. Ray stiffened imperceptibly, his hand pausing momentarily on Midnight's neck before resuming its gentle stroking. Victor stepped forward, studying the scene with professional interest. Remarkable bond you've established, he observed, his accent revealing traces of his Mexican heritage, especially with such a mature stallion. Ray nodded acknowledgement, but offered no comment. Mr. Ramirez breeds Andalusians, Alexander explained. He's considering Silvercrest for his new training facility and was curious about our Mustang rehabilitation project. Victor's eyes remained fixed on Ray, a subtle tension in his posture suggesting more than casual interest. The approach reminds me of someone I once knew, he said carefully, a colleague who believed in communication over dominance. Ray met his gaze briefly, before turning his attention back to Midnight. Common sense approach. Not so common in my experience. Victor moved closer to the fence, causing Midnight to sidestep nervously. My apologies, he said, immediately stepping back. I forget my manners around exceptional horses. Alexander checked his watch. We should continue our tour, Victor. I want to show you the new indoor arena before lunch. As they turned to leave, Victor paused. One question, if I may. What do you call him? Midnight, Ellie answered proudly. A smile touched Victor's lips. Fitting. Good day, Midnight. His eyes flicked to Ray. A pleasure seeing your work. Truly. Once they were out of earshot, Ellie turned to Ray. He seemed to really understand what you're doing. Professional recognizes technique, Ray replied neutrally. He was looking at you strangely, though. Do you know him? Ray carefully removed the rope from Midnight's back. Time to finish up for now. Horse needs rest, Ellie. Recognized the deflection but didn't press. Instead, she helped gather their minimal equipment, chattering about her school project on wild horse conservation. Ray listened with half an ear, his mind elsewhere, specifically on Victor Ramirez and the complication his presence represented. Later, that afternoon, Ray was repairing a broken latch in the tack room when Victor found him. I thought it might be you, the breeder said without preamble. When Alexander mentioned a janitor with an unusual gift for horses, I was curious. Seeing you with that Mustang confirmed it. Ray continued working, his focus on the metal fitting in his hands. Need something, Mr. Ramirez? Answers, perhaps. Victor leaned against the doorframe. 15 years is a long time to disappear, Raymond. Ray's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their task. Name's Ray Dawson, janitor. And before that? Before Silvercrest? Just a drifter. Victor sighed. I was there, you know, at Golden Vista. Not the day it happened, but after, when everyone was searching for answers. Ray said nothing, his face expressionless. You were cleared of wrongdoing, Victor continued. The investigation found no negligence on your part. Why run? Finishing the repair, Ray gathered his tools methodically. If that's all, Mr. Ramirez. They still talk about you, you know. Victor's voice softened. Your methods, your innovations, the Raymond Dawson approach. Some trainers have tried to replicate it, but without the insight, the intuition, it's just a pale imitation. Ray finally met his gaze. What do you want? To understand why one of the most gifted horsemen I've ever known is hiding in a maintenance shed in Colorado. A long silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken history. Maggie's death hit all of us hard, Victor said quietly, referencing Ray's late wife. But to lose her and then Emma within 2 years, no one would blame you for walking away. At the mention of Emma's name, something flickered in Ray's eyes, a flash of pain so raw it seemed fresh rather than 15 years old. You should go, Ray said, his voice low but firm. Nothing for you here. On the contrary. Victor straightened. What I saw today, your work with that Mustang, it's exceptional. The Raymond Dawson I remember wouldn't let tragedy erase his gift. That man doesn't exist anymore. I'm looking at him, Victor countered, whether you acknowledge it or not. The conversation ended abruptly as Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression darkening at the sight of the two men together. Mr. Ramirez, Mr. Whitfield was looking for you, he said, barely concealing his suspicion. Something about dinner arrangements. Victor nodded amiably. Of course. Thank you, Mr. Dawson, for your assistance with the tackroom inventory. Most helpful. As Victor departed, Marcus lingered, studying Ray with narrow eyes. Making friends. In high places, Janitor, Ray returned to organizing his tools. Just doing my job. Which job would that be? The one you're paid for, or the one you've convinced everyone you're qualified for? Ray said nothing, his silence only increasing Marcus's irritation. This little experiment with the Mustang has gone far enough, the trainer continued. You've had your moment in the spotlight. Now it's time for professionals to take over. Mr. Whitfield seems satisfied with progress. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. Whitfield's intrigued by novelty, but when that Mustang hurts someone, and he will, the blame will fall on the unqualified maintenance man who pretended to be a trainer. Ray met his gaze steadily. Horse isn't dangerous, just misunderstood. Like you? Marcus sneered. The mysterious janitor with secrets. Don't think people haven't noticed. Questions are being asked. Your background's being scrutinized. Nothing to find, Ray replied evenly. We'll see about that. Marcus turned to leave, then paused. That old man knows you, doesn't he? Ramirez recognized you from somewhere. The question hung in the air, unanswered. As Ray returned to his tools with the same methodical focus he applied to everything, revealing nothing, giving nothing away. That evening, Ray found Ellie waiting at Midnight's paddock, her school backpack at her feet and determination in her eyes. I've been thinking about halter training, she announced without preamble. The traditional approach uses pressure. But what if we tried something different? Ray raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. What did you have in mind? Association. She pulled a halter from her backpack. Not the standard leather training halter, but a soft rope version she'd evidently made herself. What if we pair it with something he already likes? Create a positive connection instead of forcing compliance. A ghost of a smile touched Ray's lips. Been doing research. I borrowed some books from the library, she admitted. And maybe watched. Some videos online. What do you think? Ray considered the modified halter, testing its weight and flexibility in his calloused hands. Might work. Smart thinking, Miss Ellie. Her face brightened at the praise. Can we try it now? Inside the paddock, Midnight greeted Ray with a soft nickering that would have been unimaginable 3 weeks earlier. Ellie followed at a respectful distance, careful to move slowly and predictably as Ray had taught her. Let him see it first, Ray instructed, then associate with something positive. Ellie held out the rope halter, allowing Midnight to investigate it thoroughly with his sensitive muzzle. Once his curiosity was satisfied, she produced an apple from her pocket, letting the sweet scent mingle with the halter's presence. For 20 minutes they repeated this pattern: presentation, investigation, reward. By the third attempt, Midnight was pushing his nose toward the halter eagerly, anticipating the treat that would follow. "Easy now," Ray cautioned as Ellie prepared to slip the halter over the Mustang's ears. "No rush. If he pulls back, let go." Immediately, with trembling fingers, Ellie raised the halter. Midnight tensed initially, but remained still, trusting the humans who had proven consistently non-threatening. When the halter settled into place, secured with the gentlest of knots, Ellie's face reflected pure joy. "We did it," she whispered. "Offering another apple slice as reward." Ray nodded, a peculiar tightness in his chest as he watched horse and girl connect. "You did it," he corrected softly. "Your idea, your execution. But I couldn't have done it without everything you taught me." She turned to him, eyes bright with excitement. "This is what I want to do, Mr. Dawson. Work with horses like this, understanding them, not just using them." The words struck a chord so deep, Ray had to turn away momentarily, composing himself before responding. "Good ambition," he managed finally. "World needs more of that thinking." As they removed the halter a few minutes later, leaving Midnight with a positive first experience, Sarah approached the paddock, her expression troubled. "Ray, could I speak with you?" she called. Instructing Ellie to continue giving Midnight positive reinforcement, Ray joined Sarah at the fence. "What's wrong?" She glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. "Marcus has been asking questions around town about you, your past, where you came from." Ray's expression revealed nothing. Nothing to find. "Maybe not in Heartland." She agreed, but he's expanded his search, called Contacts in Wyoming. A muscle tightened in Ray's jaw. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I consider you a friend," she replied simply. "And because whatever he's looking for, I don't think his motives are pure. He feels threatened by you, Ray, by what you represent." "Which is what, exactly?" Sarah considered the question. "A different way of doing things, one that challenges everything he's built his reputation on." She paused. "And maybe something more personal. I've seen how he watches you with Ellie. I think he resents the connection you formed with her." Ray glanced back at the paddock, where Ellie was stroking Midnight's neck with confident, gentle hands. "Girl has a gift, natural instinct." "Yes, she does." Sarah's voice softened. "And you're nurturing it, the way a real teacher would." She touched his arm lightly. "Just be careful, Ray. Marcus isn't someone who loses gracefully." After Sarah left, Ray remained at the fence, watching Ellie work with Midnight. The girl's movements echoed techniques he'd taught her, but there was something uniquely her own in the approach, an intuitive understanding that couldn't be taught. It reminded him painfully of another young woman long ago, whose natural connection with horses had seemed like magic to everyone who witnessed it. Emma, his daughter, lost 15 years ago in a training accident that destroyed 3 lives, hers, the horses, and his own. The memory threatened to overwhelm him, as fresh and devastating as the day it happened. Ray gripped the fence rail, steadying himself. Against the wave of grief, "Mr. Dawson," Ellie called, concerned by his stillness. "Are you okay?" He straightened, forcing the past back into its compartment. "Fine," he called back. "Just thinking about next steps." As darkness settled over Silvercrest, Ray completed his evening rounds with mechanical precision, his mind elsewhere. Victor's appearance had cracked open a door he'd kept firmly shut for 15 years. Behind it waited memories, responsibilities, and a legacy he'd abandoned in his grief. The question now was whether he could continue hiding from them, and whether doing so was truly what Midnight needed, what Ellie needed. what perhaps he himself needed after all this time. In his modest apartment, Ray pulled a battered shoebox from beneath his bed. Inside lay the artifacts of his previous life: photographs, newspaper clippings, a small trophy, engraved with Emma Dawson, Junior Champion. He hadn't opened it in years, carrying it from place to place like a penance he couldn't relinquish. His fingers trembled slightly as he lifted a photograph. A teenage girl with his eyes and her mother's smile, seated proudly on a gleaming bay thoroughbred. The horse that would later kill her in a tragic accident no one could have predicted. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the image. "I should have protected you." The words, repeated countless times over 15 years, offered no more comfort now than they had the first time. But as Ray replaced the lid on the box of memories, something had shifted inside him, a recognition that perhaps the time for running was coming to an end. Whether he was ready or not, the past had found him. The only question that remained was what he would do when it finally caught up completely. The following morning arrived with unexpected visitors to Silvercrest. Ray was mucking stalls when he heard unfamiliar voices in the main aisle. A woman's gentle tone accompanied by a child's excited questions. Instinctively, he stepped deeper into the shadows of the stall, his habitual desire for anonymity kicking in. "And this is where the famous Mustang is staying?" the boy asked, his voice carrying a distinctive speech pattern. "That's right, Tommy," a woman replied, presumably his mother. "Mr. Whitfield said we could observe today's training session." Ray stiffened. Alexander had mentioned nothing about visitors watching Midnight's training. Silently, he moved to the stall door, peering out to see a woman in her late 30s, standing beside a boy of about 12 in a wheelchair. The child's legs were supported by braces, his thin hands gripping specialized controls. Sarah Cooper appeared from the office, greeting them warmly. "Maria, Tommy, welcome to Silvercrest. Did you find the place okay?" "GPS makes everything possible," Maria Larson replied with a tired smile. "Tommy hasn't stopped talking about this visit since you called." "Is it true the wild horse was untrainable until the janitor started working with him?" Tommy asked, eyes bright with interest. Sarah glanced around, spotting Ray in the shadowed doorway. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" "Ray, come meet the Larsons." Reluctantly, Ray emerged, pitchfork in hand, nodding a greeting without quite meeting their eyes. "This is Maria Larson and her son Tommy," Sarah explained. "They run Healing Hooves, the equine therapy program over in Riverside. Alexander invited them to observe Midnight's training. Actually," Maria clarified, "Alexander suggested the Mustang might eventually be suitable for our program, once he's fully gentled." Ray's surprise must have shown on his face because Sarah quickly added, "It was going to be discussed with you today. The idea is that after your training period, Midnight might have a purpose beyond just being another Silvercrest show horse." Tommy wheeled himself closer to Ray, looking up with unfiltered curiosity. "Ms. Cooper says you can talk to horses. Not like actually talking, but you understand them better than most people." Ray shifted uncomfortably under the direct attention. "Horses speak clearly if you listen right," he said simply. "That's what I think too," Tommy exclaimed. "Mom says I have a special connection with our therapy horses. They seem to know I won't hurt them." "Tommy has cerebral palsy," Maria explained quietly. "He started riding as physical therapy 3 years ago. It's been transformative." Ray nodded, his discomfort with human interaction balanced against his genuine interest in equine therapy. Horses respond to authenticity, especially those who've known hardship. Tommy's face brightened. "That's exactly it. Like they can tell I'm different, but they don't care. Can I meet Midnight? I won't scare him. I promise to be super still and quiet." Ray glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragement. "Let me check on him first," he said to Tommy. "Mornings can be skittish times for horses. Need to make sure he's settled." As Ray headed toward the isolation paddock, Sarah explained the situation more fully to him. "Alexander's been talking with Maria for the past week. The idea is that if your training succeeds, Midnight might be donated to their therapy program. Instead of joining the Silvercrest breeding stock. Marcus know about this? Not yet. Alexander wanted to explore the possibility first. She lowered her voice. It's actually a perfect solution. Marcus doesn't want the Mustang here long term, but this way, Alexander can make a charitable donation and generate positive publicity without admitting defeat. Ray processed this information as they approached the paddock. Midnight stood alert in the morning light, his coat gleaming, his bearing transforming daily from frightened wild animal to composed, dignified partner. Would need careful transition, Ray said finally. Special training for therapy work? Of course, Sarah agreed. But Maria's program is excellent, and they've worked with rescue horses before. Never a Mustang, straight from the wild, but still. Ray watched Midnight for a long moment, considering. Might be good for him. Purpose beyond performing. Inside the paddock, Ray approached Midnight with their now familiar greeting. The Mustang lowered his head, accepting Ray's touch with calm trust. The transformation from their first encounter was remarkable, a testament to patience and mutual respect. Got someone who wants to meet you, Ray told the horse quietly. Special young man, different like you, needs you to be brave. After ensuring Midnight was in a receptive mood, Ray signaled for Sarah to bring the visitors to the fence. Tommy's face lit up at the sight of the magnificent black Mustang, who regarded the newcomers with alert curiosity. He's beautiful, Tommy breathed, his hands stilling on his wheelchair controls. He was wild just 3 weeks ago, Sarah explained. Ray's been working with him daily. Maria watched with professional interest. His conformation is excellent. I can see why the BLM flagged him as special. Midnight, sensing the attention, arched his neck and took several prancing steps, a natural display that drew appreciative murmurs from his audience. He's showing off, Tommy giggled. He knows he's handsome, Ray nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Smart enough to recognize admiration. Slowly, Ray guided Midnight toward the fence, using quiet words and gentle hand signals the Mustang had come to understand. To everyone's surprise, Midnight approached the visitors with only minimal hesitation, his curiosity apparently overcoming his caution. May I touch him? Tommy asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Ray assessed the situation carefully before nodding. Extend your hands slowly, palm up, let him come to you. With impressive self-control, Tommy followed these instructions perfectly. For a tense moment, Midnight hesitated, nostrils flaring as he processed this new human's unfamiliar scent and appearance. Then with deliberate gentleness, he extended his muzzle toward Tommy's waiting hand. The contact lasted only seconds, but the joy on Tommy's face transformed his features. His nose feels like velvet, he whispered, awestruck. He chose to greet. You, Ray said, something warming in his chest at the boy's reaction. That's unusual, still shy with most people. Animals always know good souls, Maria remarked, watching her son's interaction with the Mustang. Tommy has that effect on our therapy horses too. They sense his genuine spirit. For the next 30 minutes, Ray demonstrated Midnight's progress, showing how the once wild horse now accepted basic handling, the soft rope halter, and gentle guidance from voice commands. Throughout the demonstration, Tommy watched with rapt attention, asking insightful questions that revealed his own knowledge of horses. Do you think he could be a therapy horse? Tommy asked finally, directing the question to Ray rather than the adults. Ray considered the question with appropriate seriousness. Has the temperament, sensitive but not reactive, intelligent, with right training, yes. And would you help with that training, Mr. Dawson? Maria asked. We'd compensate you, of course. Your approach aligns perfectly with our program philosophy. The question caught Ray off guard. His arrangement with Silvercrest extended only through the initial gentling process. Less than 2 weeks remained in the bet with Alexander. He hadn't considered what might come after. "Need to finish current commitment," he replied carefully, "but could advise." As the Larsons prepared to leave, Tommy turned his wheelchair back toward Ray. "Mr. Dawson, thank you for saving Midnight. Some people think wild things need to be broken to be useful. You showed them another way." The simple observation, delivered with a child's directness, struck Ray deeply. He nodded acknowledgement, unable to find appropriate words in response. After they departed, Ray returned to his maintenance duties, his mind working through the implications of the morning's visit. The possibility of Midnight transitioning to therapy work presented an unexpected but fitting outcome, one that would utilize the Mustang's sensitive nature rather than trying to suppress it. His thoughts were interrupted by Victor Ramirez, who approached as Ray was repairing a water line near the indoor arena. "I'm leaving for Texas this afternoon," Victor said without preamble. "Wanted to say goodbye before I went." Ray nodded, continuing his work. "Safe travels." "I also wanted to give you this." Victor held out a business card. "My private number. When you're ready to talk, really talk, about what happened and what comes next, call me." Ray stared at the card but made no move to take it. "Nothing to discuss." Victor sighed, placing the card on a nearby shelf. "The Raymond Dawson I knew was stubborn, but he was never a coward. What happened to Emma was tragic, but it wasn't your fault. The investigation cleared you completely." "Investigation didn't bring her back," Ray replied, his voice low and rough. "No." Victor's tone softened. "Nothing could do that. But dishonoring her memory by burying your gift, the very gift you passed to her, that's a choice you've made. Every day since." Ray's hands stilled on the pipe he was fixing, his jaw tightening. "What I saw here," Victor continued, "your work with that Mustang, with Alexander's granddaughter, that's the real Raymond Dawson, the teacher, the innovator, the man who transformed how we understand horse psychology. That man died with his daughter." "Did he?" Victor challenged. "Or did he just go into hiding?" He gestured toward the isolation paddock visible through the arena windows. "That Mustang didn't respond to conventional training, nor did that girl respond to conventional teaching. They needed someone who could see beyond traditional methods, someone exactly like you." Ray remained silent, but something in his posture suggested Victor's words were finding their mark. "Think about it," Victor said, turning to leave. "And when you're ready, call me. There are people who've been waiting 15 years to welcome you back to the world you belonged in." As Victor walked away, Ray stared at the business card, memories flooding back unbidden. Seminars he'd taught, books he'd written, students whose careers he'd launched. A lifetime of purpose, abandoned in a single day of tragedy. Later that afternoon, Alexander summoned Ray to discuss the Larsons' visit. The owner sat behind his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed a document. "Remarkable impression you made," Alexander said, setting down the paper. "Maria Larson called me personally to express her admiration for your methods. She's quite determined to recruit you for her program." Ray stood with his customary stillness. "Therapy program's good work." "Yes, it is." Alexander removed his glasses, studying Ray thoughtfully. "And it presents an elegant solution to our Mustang situation. Once your training period concludes, successfully as now seems likely, Silvercrest will donate Midnight to Healing Hooves with appropriate publicity. Everyone benefits. Horse especially," Ray noted. "Indeed." Alexander leaned back in his chair. "Which brings me to a proposition. Silvercrest could benefit from a consulting relationship with Healing Hooves, an ongoing partnership that would naturally require someone to liaise between the organizations. Someone with expertise in both traditional training and the alternative methods." Ray's expression revealed nothing. Meaning? Meaning, Alexander said deliberately, I'm offering you a position, not as a janitor, but as a specialist trainer focused on rehabilitation cases. Cases like Midnight. The offer hung in the air between them, unexpected and complicated. Why? Ray asked finally. Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. Because you've proven yourself exceptionally skilled, because such skills should be utilized appropriately, and he added with calculated precision, because Raymond Dawson's expertise would be a valuable asset to Silvercrest's reputation. So there it was. Open acknowledgement of what Alexander had clearly confirmed through his own investigations. Not who I am anymore, Ray said quietly. Nonsense. Alexander waved a dismissive hand. You've demonstrated otherwise every day for the past 3 weeks. Whatever happened in Wyoming, whatever drove you to abandon your career, it clearly didn't diminish your abilities or your understanding of horses. Before Ray could respond, the office door opened and Marcus entered, his expression darkening at the sight of Ray. You wanted to see me, Mr. Whitfield. Yes, Marcus. I was just discussing a new position with Ray. I'd like you to work together on developing a rehabilitation program for rescue horses, something that combines conventional training with Ray's more intuitive approach. Marcus's face flushed with barely contained anger. Sir, with all due respect, we know nothing about this man's actual qualifications. His background is not your concern, Alexander interrupted sharply. Results are what matter, and Ray's results with the Mustang speak for themselves. The Mustang got lucky, Marcus protested. One success doesn't establish expertise. Alexander's expression hardened. My decision is made, Marcus. Either work with Ray on this initiative or focus exclusively on the competition horses. Your choice. The ultimatum left no room for argument. With a curt nod, Marcus retreated, closing the door with controlled precision that barely masked his fury. He'll adjust, Alexander said, turning back to Ray. Eventually. Ray remained silent, processing the rapid sequence of events that were dismantling his carefully constructed anonymity. I don't need an answer today, Alexander continued. Take the weekend to consider my offer. But know this, janitor or trainer, your past will eventually emerge fully. The only question is whether you'll control that narrative or let it control you. As Ray left the office, he found Ellie waiting in the corridor, clearly having overheard at least part of the conversation. Is it true? She asked, eyes wide. Grandfather's offering you a real training position? Just talk for now, Ray replied, uncomfortable with her excitement. But you'll take it, right? You have to. Her enthusiasm bubbled over. We could work together officially. You could teach me everything you know about natural horsemanship. The parallel to another eager young woman, 15 years earlier, struck Ray with physical force. For a moment, Emma's face superimposed itself over Ellie's. The same passion, the same hunger to learn, the same innate understanding of horses that couldn't be taught. Mr. Dawson? Ellie's voice pulled him back to the present. Are you okay? Fine, he managed. Just thinking. About the offer? About costs, he replied cryptically. Everything has them. As evening settled over Silvercrest, Ray sat with Midnight. In the isolation paddock, the Mustang grazing peacefully nearby. The silence between them held a companionship that required no words. Two beings who understood what it meant to be displaced, to reconstruct an identity in unfamiliar surroundings. Things changing too fast for both of us, Ray murmured, more to himself than the horse. Easier when nobody expected anything. Midnight raised his head, ears pivoting toward Ray with interest. Got decisions to make, Ray continued, about who I am. Who I was, whether those can be the same person anymore. As darkness fell, Ray remained in the paddock, his weathered hand stroking Midnight's neck, finding comfort in the simple connection that had started this unexpected journey. The Mustang leaned into his touch, offering wordless support that penetrated deeper than any human consolation could have. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more pressure, more unveiling of the past he'd tried to outrun. But for tonight, in this quiet moment between man and horse, Ray found a clarity that had eluded him for 15 years. The recognition that running from pain had only preserved it, unchanged and unhealed. Perhaps it was time to stand still and face it at last. Saturday. Morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of spring day that brought riders flooding to Silvercrest's trails and arenas. Ray arrived earlier than usual, seeking the quiet before the weekend crowd descended. To his surprise, he found Sarah already in the office, coffee in hand, concern etched on her features. "Trouble?" he asked, pausing in the doorway. "Marcus left this on Alexander's desk yesterday evening." She held up a manila folder. "Thought you should see it before anyone else does." Ray accepted the folder with wary hands. Inside lay newspaper clippings, printouts of articles, and a formal-looking report, all detailing the tragedy at Golden Vista Ranch 15 years earlier. The headline that had haunted his dreams for years screamed from the yellowed newsprint. "Championship rider Emma Dawson, 19, killed in training accident." "He's gathered everything," Sarah said quietly. "The accident, the investigation, the hearing that cleared you, even obituaries for your wife and daughter." Ray's face remained impassive as he paged through the dossier, though his knuckles whitened. Against the paper's edge. "Alexander's seen this?" "Not yet. Marcus left it after hours. I'm sure he intended for it to be discovered Monday morning, preferably in front of others." Sarah hesitated. "Ray, I'm so sorry about your daughter. I had no idea." He closed the folder, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Long time ago. Not to you, I think." Her voice held gentle understanding rather than pity. "What will you do?" Ray considered the question, staring out the window toward Midnight's paddock. The Mustang stood alert in the morning light, watching a pair of barn swallows dart across the sky. "Stop running," he said finally. Sarah's eyebrows lifted in surprise at the unexpected resolution. "You're staying?" "Need to finish what I started. With the horse, with the truth." He tapped the folder. "Mind if I take this?" "It's yours by right," she answered. "What people did to your privacy isn't." Ray tucked the folder under his arm. "Thank you, Sarah. For this, for everything." As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Marcus doesn't know I intercepted it. Might be useful to keep it that way." The ghost of a smile touched Ray's lips, the first genuine amusement she'd seen from him. "Understood." Rather than heading straight to Midnight, Ray made a detour to his apartment, placing the folder with his own box of mementos. Later, he would review it all, confront the documented version of the worst day of his life. But first, he had a job to finish. The isolation paddock stood empty when he arrived. Midnight nowhere to be seen. Alarm rippled through him until he spotted a handwritten note pinned to the gate. "Moved to training ring for assessment. MR." Cursing under his breath, Ray hurried toward the outdoor arena. The sight that greeted him confirmed his worst fears. Marcus and Trevor Wilson circled Midnight in the rectangular space, using lunge whips to drive the increasingly agitated Mustang around the perimeter. The horse's eyes rolled white with fear, sweat darkening his black coat despite the morning's chill. "What are you doing?" Ray demanded, entering through the side gate. Marcus barely glanced his way. "My job. Assessing this animal's responsiveness to standard training protocols." "We had an agreement." Ray's voice remained low, but carried an authority that made both trainers hesitate. "No conventional methods until the month was complete." "Mr. Whitfield authorized this evaluation," Marcus countered smoothly. "As head trainer, I need to document the Mustang's progress in official terms." Ray's eyes narrowed, recognizing the lie. "Where's Alexander?" "Santa Fe." Business trip, left last night. Marcus allowed himself a smug smile. Won't return until Monday, which gives us the weekend to make actual progress with this animal. The situation crystallized in Ray's mind. With Alexander absent, Marcus had seized the opportunity to undermine everything Ray had accomplished, using traditional dominance-based methods to prove his point. "Step away from the horse," Ray said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Trevor glanced uncertainly between the two men, sensing the dangerous shift in dynamics. Marcus, however, merely laughed. "You forget your place, Janitor. You have no authority here." "Don't need authority, just understanding." Ray moved deliberately toward midnight, placing himself between the frightened Mustang and the aggressive. Trainers, look at him. You're triggering every predator response he's evolved over thousands of years. "That's the point," Marcus snapped. "He needs to learn humans are dominant. He needs to learn humans are trustworthy," Ray countered. "You're destroying 3 weeks of progress in 15 minutes. Trevor lowered his whip, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe we should ease up, Marcus. The horse is pretty stressed." "The horse is learning," Marcus insisted, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. Several stable hands and early arriving riders had gathered at the arena fence, watching the confrontation with interest. Ray turned his back on Marcus, a deliberate show of dismissal, and focused entirely on midnight. With soft words and calming gestures, he approached the trembling Mustang, who recognized him despite his fear. "Easy, friend," Ray murmured. "Nothing's changed between us." Midnight's breathing gradually steadied as Ray made contact, running gentle hands over the horse's damp neck. The transformation was remarkable to observe, from panic to cautious trust in the span of minutes. "Impressive parlor trick," Marcus said, trying to maintain his authority despite the murmuring audience. "But it doesn't prove anything real. Training requires structure, discipline. Real training requires understanding," came Ellie's voice from the gate. She entered the arena, moving with deliberate calm toward Ray and Midnight. "You're scaring him for no reason except to prove a point." "This doesn't concern you, Ellie," Marcus said sharply. "Go back to the stables." "It absolutely concerns me," she retorted with unexpected backbone. "Midnight is part of my project with Mr. Dawson. Grandfather approved it. You have no right to interfere." The standoff deepened, with Marcus clearly recognizing he was losing not only the practical argument, but also the public perception battle. Stable hands and riders continued to gather, drawn by the unusual confrontation. "This isn't over," he muttered, stalking toward the gate. "Trevor, come on." As the trainers departed, Ray focused on settling Midnight, assessing the damage done. To their hard-won trust. To his relief, the Mustang's response to him remained consistent, wary but willing, his fear response triggered by the whips and aggressive approach rather than human contact itself. "Is he okay?" Ellie asked, maintaining a respectful distance. "Will be," Ray affirmed, "smart enough to distinguish between different humans now. Good sign." Together, they led Midnight back to his familiar paddock, away from the curious onlookers. As they walked, Ellie's indignation bubbled over. "I can't believe Marcus would do that. It's sabotage. Fear makes people behave poorly," Ray replied. "Marcus sees change coming, threatens everything he's built." "That's no excuse," she insisted. "What he did was cruel to Midnight and unfair to you." Ray studied her righteous anger, seeing again shadows of his daughter's similarly passionate nature. "Life's rarely fair, Miss Ellie. Learning to navigate. Unfairness without becoming unfair yourself. That's the challenge." His words gave her pause. "Is that why you never fought back? All these years as a janitor when you're clearly capable of so much more?" The question struck closer to home than she could have known. Ray busied himself checking Midnight for any signs of injury before answering. "Sometimes walking away seems easier than standing your ground. Took me too long to learn that's rarely true. "Are you going to accept grandfather's offer?" she asked. "Become a real trainer here?" "Considering it," he admitted. "But there are complications because of your past." When he looked at her sharply, she added, "I'm not stupid, Mr. Dawson. I know there's something you're not telling, something that made you hide who you really are." Ray sighed, recognizing the futility of continued evasion with this perceptive young woman. "Your grandfather knows. Marcus knows. Soon everyone will." He ran a hand along Midnight's sleek neck. "Time for truth. Whatever it is," Ellie said with quiet certainty, "it doesn't change what you've done here, what you've taught me, what you've given Midnight." Her simple faith touched something long frozen in Ray's heart. For 15 years he'd lived as a shadow of himself, convinced that the tragedy that took Emma had disqualified him from ever teaching, ever leading, ever making a difference again. Yet here stood this young woman, seeing value in him despite not knowing his full story. "Thank you," he said simply. Later that afternoon, as Ray was demonstrating basic lead line work with Midnight, Sarah approached with news. Maria Larson called. "She's bringing Tommy to watch tomorrow's training session. I told her you'd be working with Midnight at 10. Ray nodded his agreement. Good timing. Planned to introduce ground obstacles, show his problem-solving abilities. "Also," Sarah continued hesitantly, "Dr. Miller asked if you'd be willing to help with a difficult case. 3-year-old thoroughbred, with handling issues, owners at her wit's end. Marcus's head trainer," Ray pointed out. "The owner specifically asked for you. Word is spreading about your methods." The revelation caused Ray pause. His careful anonymity was dissolving faster than anticipated, ripples of recognition expanding beyond Silvercrest's boundaries. "Tell Dr. Miller I'll talk with him," Ray conceded finally. "After Midnight's session tomorrow." That evening, as the facility quieted for the night, Ray sat in Midnight's paddock with Victor's business card in one hand and a pen in the other. After long consideration, he wrote a brief note on the back. "Victor, ready to talk. We'll call Monday." Raymond, he tucked the card into his shirt pocket, decision made. Whatever came next, exposure, explanation, reintegration into the world he'd fled, would be on his terms, not driven by Marcus's vindictive revelations. As if sensing the weight of the moment, Midnight approached, resting his muzzle against Ray's shoulder in an unprecedented display of affection. Ray allowed himself to lean slightly into the contact, drawing strength from the Mustang's steady presence. "Ironic, isn't it?" he murmured to the horse. "Came here to help you adapt to a new life. Maybe you're doing the same for me." Sunday morning brought unexpected company to Midnight's training session. Not only Maria and Tommy Larson, but a small crowd of interested observers. Several boarding clients, a few staff members, even Dr. Miller and his wife. Word had spread about the remarkable progress of the wild Mustang and the unorthodox methods of the janitor-turned-trainer. Ray, uncomfortable with the audience but unwilling to disappoint Tommy, proceeded with the planned demonstration. He had set up a simple obstacle course in the outdoor arena. Poles to step over, a tarp to walk across, a narrow passage between barrels, and a small bridge. "Today we're testing Midnight's problem-solving abilities," he explained to Tommy, who watched eagerly from his wheelchair at the arena's edge. "Wild horses navigate difficult terrain constantly. They're naturally adaptable." With minimal guidance, Ray led Midnight to the first obstacle. Using only the lightest pressure on the lead rope and subtle body language, he invited rather than forced the Mustang to engage with each challenge. The audience watched in fascinated silence as Midnight considered each obstacle, sometimes circling to examine it from different angles before carefully navigating through. "He's thinking," Tommy observed insightfully. "Not just reacting." "Exactly right," Ray affirmed. "Traditional training often bypasses the thinking process, demanding immediate compliance. This approach respects his intelligence. The demonstration continued smoothly until the final obstacle, the small wooden bridge. Here, Midnight balked, clearly finding the hollow sound beneath his hooves disturbing. Rather than forcing the issue, Ray stepped back, allowing the Mustang to investigate at his own pace. "Patience now," Ray explained to the onlookers. "Pressure would create resistance. Freedom creates curiosity." Sure enough, after several minutes of investigation, sniffing, pawing, listening to the sounds his hooves made on the wood, Midnight made his own decision to cross the bridge, following Ray with cautious but willing steps. The small crowd applauded spontaneously, causing Midnight to startle slightly before settling. Tommy's face shone with appreciation. "That was amazing!" he exclaimed. "He figured it out himself." "Horses always prefer their own decisions to ours," Ray explained, stroking Midnight's neck in acknowledgement of his achievement. "Our job is to present the options clearly and reward good choices." As the session concluded, Maria approached Ray, while Tommy continued watching Midnight from the fence line. "I've never seen training quite like this," she admitted. "It's reminiscent of some natural horsemanship methods, but you've added elements I haven't encountered before." Ray shrugged modestly. "Just listening to the horse." "It's more than that," she insisted. "You've developed a methodology here, one that would be particularly valuable for therapy horses." She hesitated. "I understand Alexander has offered you a position here at Silvercrest, but I'd like to make a counteroffer. We need someone with your perspective at healing hooves, particularly if Midnight will be joining our program." The second job offer. In as many days left, Ray momentarily speechless. After 15 years of intentional obscurity, opportunities were suddenly materializing from all directions. "Need to finish current commitment," he managed finally. "Then we can discuss possibilities." As Maria rejoined Tommy, Dr. Miller approached with his wife Sandra. "Remarkable progress," the veterinarian commented. "3 weeks ago, that horse was borderline dangerous. Now he's solving problems like a seasoned therapy prospect." "Always had the capacity," Ray replied. "Just needed the right approach." "Speaking of which," Dr. Miller continued, "that thoroughbred I mentioned is arriving tomorrow morning. Owner's desperate for help. Mare has tremendous potential, but panics during standard training. Reminds me of cases you used to write about in your articles." Ray stiffened slightly at the direct reference to his previous career. "You knew?" The veterinarian smiled apologetically. "Recognized your methods almost immediately. I attended your symposium in Denver years ago. Changed my entire approach to equine behavior." He extended his hand. "It's an honor to finally work with you, Mr. Dawson. The real you." The acknowledgement, respectful rather than accusatory, caught Ray off guard. He accepted the handshake with a nod of appreciation, realizing that perhaps not all recognitions would bring pain. Some might actually offer healing. As the observers dispersed and Ray led Midnight back to his paddock, he glimpsed Marcus watching from the shadows of the stable entrance, his expression unreadable. The head trainer turned away without acknowledgement, but Ray sensed the confrontation was merely postponed, not avoided. Tomorrow would bring Alexander's return, the thoroughbred with handling issues, and inevitably the formal exposure of Ray's past. The carefully constructed walls of his anonymous existence were crumbling completely now, leaving him exposed, but also unexpectedly liberated. 15 years of running had left him exhausted in ways he hadn't fully acknowledged until now, until Midnight had shown him that even the wildest spirit could find peace without surrendering its essential nature. "Big day tomorrow," he told the Mustang as he removed the halter. "For both of us." Midnight nickered softly in response. The sound almost conversational, as if the horse understood exactly what was at stake. Monday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. Ray rose before dawn, reviewing the folder Sarah had intercepted alongside his own carefully preserved mementos. The juxtaposition of newspaper headlines with personal photographs created a more complete picture than either collection alone. The public tragedy and the private grief finally acknowledged as parts of the same story. When he arrived at the stables, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Staff members exchanged meaningful glances as he passed, suggesting Marcus had already begun spreading his discoveries despite Sarah's intervention. Alexander's Mercedes was parked in its usual spot, indicating his return from Santa Fe. Ray had expected a summons to the office, but instead found the owner waiting at Midnight's paddock, watching the Mustang with thoughtful eyes. "Good morning, Dawson," Alexander greeted him. "Or perhaps I should say, Professor Dawson, given your previous academic appointments." Ray nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without surprise. "Morning, sir." Marcus provided quite the dossier. "On your background," Alexander continued, "though I suspect he intended it as an exposé rather than a recommendation." Sarah mentioned. Alexander smiled slightly. "Yes, she was quite protective of your privacy. Loyal staff is invaluable." He gestured toward Midnight. "Final week of our arrangement begins today. The Mustang has exceeded everyone's expectations." "He's a quick learner," Ray agreed, relieved at the apparent lack of judgment regarding his concealed past. "As the deadline approaches, we should discuss your future at Silvercrest." Alexander turned to face him directly. "My offer stands, though. I now understand better why you might hesitate to accept a public-facing role." Before Ray could respond, the sound of a horse trailer rumbling up the drive interrupted them. Dr. Miller waved from his truck as he guided the trailer toward the unloading area. "Ah, the thoroughbred case," Alexander noted. "James mentioned you'd agreed to consult. Excellent initiative." Ray excused himself to assist with the new arrival. The mare that emerged from the trailer confirmed his suspicions. A beautiful 3-year-old with classic lines but wild, frightened eyes. She pranced nervously at the end of her lead rope, head high, nostrils flared. "Bella," introduced her owner, a middle-aged woman with the weathered complexion of a lifelong equestrian. Bloodlines to die for, movement like a dream, but completely unmanageable during training. 3 professional trainers have given up. Ray approached slowly, noting the mare's reactions, not aggressive, but hypersensitive, her eyes tracking every movement with exaggerated concern. "Reminds me of a case you wrote about in your book," Dr. Miller commented. "The one with neurological hypersensitivity. Similar presentation," Ray agreed, carefully avoiding direct eye contact with the mare, though each case has unique factors. For the next hour, Ray observed the thoroughbred from various distances, noting trigger points and reactions. Unlike Midnight's fear-based responses, Bella's behavior suggested something more complex, perhaps a sensory processing issue that made normal training methods overwhelming. A small audience gathered to watch, including Alexander, Ellie, and eventually Marcus, whose presence at the periphery carried a palpable tension. "What's your assessment?" Alexander asked finally. Ray considered his answer carefully. "Mare's not defiant. She's overwhelmed. Standard training creates sensory overload." "And your recommendation?" "Modified approach, desensitization, environmental management." Ray outlined a gentle protocol that would accommodate the mare's unique nervous system while building her confidence. The owner listened with increasing hope. "That's the first explanation that makes sense. Everyone else just said she was stubborn or crazy." "Neither," Ray assured her. "Just wired differently, needs understanding, not discipline." As he demonstrated initial techniques, Marcus stepped forward, arms crossed defensively. This approach might work for special cases, but it's impractical for most training situations. The traditional methods exist for a reason. Rather than dismissing the comment, Ray nodded. "Different horses, different needs. Traditional methods work for many, not all." The measured response seemed to catch Marcus off guard, perhaps expecting the confrontation that had been building for weeks. Before he could recover, Alexander intervened. This is precisely why Silvercrest would benefit from a dual approach. Marcus handling our show prospects with conventional methods, Ray working with special cases requiring alternative techniques. The suggestion hung in the air like a peace offering, an attempt to create space for both philosophies under one roof. Marcus's expression shifted from hostility to cautious consideration. "Would need clear boundaries," he said finally. "Defined responsibilities." "Naturally," Alexander agreed, "a collaborative approach rather than a competitive one." Ray remained silent, recognizing the olive branch being extended. His focus returned to Bella, who had begun to settle under his gentle handling, her explosive energy channeling into curiosity rather than panic. By mid-morning, the thoroughbred demonstration concluded with a tentative success, Bella accepting basic handling with notably reduced anxiety. As her owner led her to a temporary stall, Ray turned his attention back to Midnight, who watched the proceedings from his paddock with evident interest. "He's jealous," Ellie observed with a smile, joining Ray at the fence. "Doesn't like sharing. His trainer." "Observant," Ray corrected, "learning from watching other horses, natural herd behavior." Together they entered the paddock, where Midnight greeted them with newfound confidence, a far cry from the terrified wild animal of 4. Weeks earlier, Ray checked his calendar, realizing with surprise that the official bet would conclude in just 3 days. "Think we'll win Grandfather's bet?" Ellie asked, seeming to follow his thoughts. "Already won," Ray replied. "Midnight's made his choice to trust. Rest is just demonstration." As they began the day's training session, Ray was acutely aware of Alexander watching from the office window, Marcus observed from the stable entrance, and various staff members found excuses to pass by. The Mustang's transformation had become Silvercrest's most compelling drama, but Ray understood the fascination extended beyond Midnight to himself, the mysterious janitor whose expertise had upended the facility's hierarchy. After lunch, Ray received a text message from Maria Larson. "Tommy can't stop talking about Midnight. When you make your decision, please consider how much you could offer our riders at Healing Hooves." The message added another layer to his already complex decision. Silvercrest offered prestige, resources, and the opportunity to reshape a traditional program. Healing Hooves offered purpose, impact, and perhaps a gentler reintroduction to the equestrian world. As Ray pondered these options, Sarah appeared with news. "Phone call for you," she said. "Sheriff Parker says it's about the incident this weekend." Ray frowned. "What incident?" "Marcus apparently filed a complaint about you interfering with his official duties. Claims you undermined his authority with the Mustang." The pettiness of the accusation surprised even Ray, who had expected continued resistance but not formal complaints. In the office, Sheriff Dan Parker's weathered voice carried a note of embarrassment. "Had to follow up officially." "Ray, Marcus was quite insistent." "Understand," Ray replied. "Just doing your job." "Between us," the sheriff continued, lowering his voice, "this seems like a territorial dispute rather than a legal issue. Alexander already called to clarify that you had full authority with the Mustang project." "Appreciate that." "One other thing," Parker added. "When Marcus filed the complaint, he made some claims about your background, said you were hiding your identity, had some connection to an accident in Wyoming years back." The sheriff paused. "That true?" Ray took a deep breath, the moment of truth finally upon him. "Partly changed my professional life, not my legal identity, nothing criminal." "Figured as much," Parker said with evident relief. "You've been a model citizen since arriving in Heartland. Whatever happened before seems like you've done your penance." The simple absolution, offered without judgment by a man who embodied Heartland's practical values, touched Ray unexpectedly. Thank you, Sheriff. After ending the call, Ray found Alexander waiting outside the office. Marcus will be disciplined for filing that nuisance complaint, the owner stated firmly. I've made it clear that such tactics are unacceptable. Ray shook his head. Not necessary. Man's fighting for what he believes in. Alexander studied him with newfound respect. Remarkably generous, given his behavior toward you. Fear makes people do unfortunate things, Ray observed. Doesn't make them bad people. Perhaps that's why you're so effective with difficult horses, Alexander mused. You understand fear's role in resistance. The insight was perceptive enough to give Ray pause. His own fear of judgment, of responsibility, of connection had driven his choices for 15 years. Perhaps his understanding of Midnight's reactions stemmed partly from recognizing those same impulses in himself. The remainder of the afternoon passed in routine training, with Midnight now accepting a soft saddle pad on his back, a significant milestone that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Ellie documented each achievement in her journal, her notes reflecting both scientific observation and genuine attachment to the Mustang. Do you think he'll be okay at healing hooves? She asked as they removed the training equipment. Will he miss us? He'll adapt, Ray assured her. Horses live in the present better than humans, but yes, he'll remember. Will you go with him? The question carried layers of meaning about Ray's decision regarding his future, about his growing mentorship of Ellie, about the bonds formed over the past month. Still deciding, he answered honestly. As evening approached, Ray found himself drawn to the small cemetery on Silvercrest's eastern edge, a peaceful spot where several beloved horses had been laid to rest over the decades. He stood among the simple markers, contemplating mortality and legacy in the golden light of sunset. Thought I might find you here, came Victor's voice from behind him. Got your note? Ray turned, unsurprised by his former colleague's arrival. Wasn't sure you'd come. Some journeys are worth making, Victor replied simply. He gestured toward the horse graves. Paying respects? Just thinking. Ray's gaze returned to the horizon. About what happens after the bet ends, after Midnight moves on. You have options now, Victor observed. More than you've allowed yourself in 15 years. Too many, perhaps. They stood in companionable silence, two men with decades of shared history in the horse world, until Victor spoke again. I visited Emma's grave last month, left flowers from the old training team. They still remember her, you know. Her laugh, her extraordinary talent. Ray's throat tightened. She had more natural ability at 19 than I had after 20 years of training. She had your gift, Victor agreed, and your teaching. That combination was special. He paused. The accident wasn't your fault, Raymond. The investigation proved that. The horse had an undetectable aneurysm. Could have happened with any rider, any trainer. I was responsible, Ray said, the words carrying the weight of 15 years of self-recrimination. Not legally, perhaps, but morally. I encouraged her confidence, pushed her to take risks. You supported her passion, Victor corrected gently, as any good father would, as any good teacher would. The distinction hung between them as the sunset painted the cemetery in deepening amber. Eventually, Ray spoke again. Been thinking about what Emma would say, about all this. He gestured vaguely toward Silvercrest. About me hiding for so long. Victor smiled slightly. I think we both know exactly what she'd say. Ray nodded, a fleeting smile touching his lips. She'd be furious, tell me I was wasting what I taught her to value most. That sounds like Emma, Victor agreed, never one to mince words. As darkness began to fall, they walked back toward the main facility, their conversation turning to practicalities, the options before Ray, the logistics of reclaiming his professional identity, the impact his methods might have if he chose to share them again. Whatever you decide, Victor said as they approached the stables. "Know that there's a community waiting to welcome you back. Not with judgment, but with respect for both what you accomplished before and what you've endured since." The words offered a perspective Ray hadn't allowed himself to consider, that his return might be met with understanding rather than condemnation, with appreciation rather than scrutiny. At Midnight's paddock, they paused. The Mustang approached the fence, greeting Ray with the quiet familiarity that had developed between them. Victor watched their interaction with professional appreciation. "Remarkable bond," he observed, "reminiscent of your work with Storm before. The accident, the mention of the horse that had been destroyed after Emma's death, might once have triggered Ray's retreat. Tonight, he merely nodded, acknowledging rather than evading the connection. Different horse, different man, Ray said, but similar principles. The principles endure, Victor agreed. Perhaps that's the legacy worth preserving, regardless of where you decide to apply them next. As Victor departed with promises to remain in contact, Ray lingered with Midnight under the rising moon. Tomorrow would bring decisions, announcements, conclusions to the narrative that had unexpectedly unfolded over the past month. The bet would be settled, Midnight's future determined, Ray's identity fully acknowledged. Yet beneath the practical outcomes lay something more profound, the recognition that sometimes the most challenging rehabilitation isn't of the wild, Mustang before you, but of the wounded spirit within. We healed each other, Ray murmured to Midnight, who listened with pricked ears. Strange how life works sometimes. The Mustang nickered softly in the darkness, the sound carrying neither agreement nor disagreement, simply companionship, which in the end was exactly what both had needed most. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.